Ron Bochar and Matthew Price are Emmy nominated for the fourth season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Ron, you're the re-recording mixer on the series, and Matt, you are the production mixer on the series, and you're nominated for sound mixing. Congratulations to you both on another nomination for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
It's a award-winning show.
That's for sure. I wanted to ask you both, how the recognition feels for this fourth season. I know you're in production now on the fifth season. This is recognizing your work on the fourth. So I just wanted to ask you, how it feels for that, that body of work in particular.
Well,
And
from my end, we went through COVID to make this series, season 4, and no one knew how that was quite going to go. So to be recognized after that process, I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, COVID definitely threw everyone for a loop. We were very lucky. They were very strict with COVID protocols, and we didn't shut down for one day the entire season. We have huge amounts of back. I thought we started out in the Gaslight Club, which is a very small. It's a set. It's very small, and they packed it full of people. I would have thought they would have had less background, just for safety reasons, whatever. But we had some background on some sets. I know there was days when they tested 600 people, just because Maisel doesn't ever do anything small.
No, Maisel does nothing small.
On set, we're always going to be like, so what do you think? It's going to be big or small? And we go, it'll be Maisel. It'll be big. We Maisel up.
it really comes across on screen this season. It really does feel just like any other season of Maisel. And you're nominated for the season finale in particular, How Do You Get to Carnegie Hall? So I just wanted to ask you both, why that episode, or what do you think it is about that episode that's so indicative of your work this season? I mean, obviously it has a lot of scale and it's a wonderful episode, but I just wanted to ask you both, what do you love about that one in particular? We'll start with you, Matt.
I personally think it's the best episode the show has ever produced. Dramatically, if not anything else. Sound-wise, of course. But, we always get better and better with each episode. But dramatically, everyone thinks it's a comedy, but the drama and the emotion that the show reaches is very real and earned. It never feels like, okay, we're going to go for a sappy moment, or we're going to go for a sentimental moment at all. The cast is. I've done a lot. I've been doing this a long time, and I was on Sopranos for 10 years, but this is probably my favorite show of all time. In terms of challenges for sound, we're do a lot of stuff on the stage, which makes my life easier as a New York sound mixer with noisy New York environments. But we do go out in times, and the thing that's the most challenging is the scale of the show and the size of the cast and the size of the scripts. We do every script's about 85 pages for a hour-long show, and basically almost every word gets in there. Not to mention added dialogue that they put in like behind the scenes. Now I know they don't do a lot of looping, which is a credit to my team, but also Ron just takes it and runs with it, takes my tracks. And I watched the episode again the other night just to refamiliarize myself with it. And your use of ambience as Ron is just really extraordinary. When you listen for it, it's like subtle but present, and it just brings everything to life.
No, thanks, Matt.
Not to mention the raid that's part of the end, the raid of the Burlesque Club, which is just, there's so many, it feels like it's 96 tracks of audio. So.
Yeah, Ron, how about you yeah, go ahead.
For 8, one of the things about Maisel is the story. It's a very story-driven, series, no matter what, and dialogue just never stops. It's unrelenting. But in the case of 8, the dynamics of that dialogue were altered more than other episodes have been. We have a lot of quiet. We have a lot of moments without music. We have a lot of moments where it's just two people talking. And then it blows up and gets its usual Maisel craziness. But it's a very subtle episode on so many levels that, it was a challenge. We weren't used to that. It kind of threw us a little bit. just in that we had quiet for once that we could deal with. And it was a joy to be able to do that. And I agree with Matt. I think it's probably one of the best episodes of all the seasons at this point in time that allows us to get further and deeper into a lot of the characters. And, we were able to do some of that with sound, but it was mainly the writing and mainly what Amy and Dan brought to the show.
Yeah, let's
Um,
talk about. Oh, sorry. Go
I
ahead,
just want to
Matt.
add something. It which makes it even more special, more of a joy that we were recognized for with our nominations, because I'm used to the big shows, getting the effect shows, like some of our other people that were nominated along with us, not always in our category, the Marvel shows and the sci-fi shows and the effect shows. So when a dialogue-driven show gets recognized, especially as a dialogue mixer, which is my primary focus, it's very very gratifying.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything you're both saying, especially Ron, as you said, those quieter moments in the episode. I love some of those scenes with Abe and Shirley, for example, or the hospital scenes. Really, wonderful work. But inspired by the title, I want to start, diving into the episode with Carnegie Hall and ask both of you some questions. Starting with you, Matt, just capturing the audio in that theater. What was it like to work in Carnegie Hall? And you're doing a lot in that theater, not only capturing Luke Kirby's performance as Lenny on stage, I'm sure working with the background actors, the sound of the audience, and then that beautiful scene between Lenny and Midge. Just talk about the different dynamics of those scenes in the theater and working in that space.
Well, I mean, it's Carnegie Hall. It was really extraordinary being on that stage. I mean, I saw Itzhak Perlman do a solo violin concerto there at one point. There's really no space like it. It's just when you stand there and you just talk on the stage and you hear the space, the resonance of it, but at the same time it's very direct. It's a unique space. One thing that was fun was that uh, because of COVID, none of the crew from Carnegie Hall had worked in months and months and months, and we were the first people coming in because we were shooting in a local one space. We work with a lot of local one people. But aside from all that, I wired all our principals. Ron likes to have as many tracks as he can get, and the mic that Lenny was using, that Luke Kirby was using, was a vintage shell, but we've taken upon ourselves to have the older looking mics modified with modern electronics, because while it's a period show, it shouldn't sound like it was recorded in the 60s. So that was part of it. Audience wise, we had about 400 audience members, and they would move them around because they couldn't fill it up. And they wound up shooting what they call tiling, VFX, where they would then take and move them around so that when you saw it on air, the space was really filled up. So I try to get as much direct ambience as possible and get the dialogue really punchy, because I know Ron's going to add reverb. One fun thing is the introduction for Lenny Bruce on the stage was the actual introduction from the original performance that the real Lenny Bruce actually did. And we had that on hand, which we then played on the stage in the house before Luke Kirby went out to do a show. So that just added this extra little bit of life to the whole scene.
Yeah, that's terrific. I wanted to ask you both about that in particular, and Ron, over to you on balancing all of that sound, all of the the audience, and as Matt is saying, the audience in different sections of the theater, and working with that original recording of Lenny Bruce. Talk to us about your kind of piece of bringing that to life.
Well, what Matt gave me was the bass that track lives in and sounds in. And then what I have to do is put it farther into Carnegie Hall. I have to give the sense of space that, Matt's tracks didn't necessarily capture, because we're trying to get the cleanest that we can and the best that we can. But I can hear in his track what some of that slap is or what some of that verb is, and try to emulate it for later. But again, that whole scene takes place with Lenny on the stage through a microphone. He's got it in front of him. So I'm able to process that to give it that sense of some kind of augmentation going on in his voice. But then I also have to play games with when we're with Midge. She's at the back of the theater. So how is that going to sound? And then there's a few cutaways from the middle of the theater. And, you know, everybody has to have their own place. So we would work with that. The audience, again, what Matt gave us was a great bed, but then we had to like do the group on top of that to give us the specifics that were happening that weren't necessarily picked up by Matt's mic. And that's all over. That's people next to Midge when she's standing in the back of the theater, when she's moving around the stage, whatever like that. So during Lenny's performance, there's multi-layers worth of group, there's multi-layers worth of Foley, there's multi-layers worth of sound effects and cheers and claps and all that happening all at once, to try to emulate what it would be like if you were in Carnegie Hall. And that opening spiel that's given by the introduction, Lenny's backstage when half of that's playing out. And if you'd notice, there's a little tiny speaker next to the doors where Lenny is backstage. So as soon as we cut into that backstage area, we continued with the sound as if it's being played out behind the doors. But then we also had another version of it playing out of that little tiny speaker, just so that you still kept, you know, the thread of what's being said, but at the same time, it's being processed even further from the reality, but it gives us more of a reality, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I give Ron
Yeah,
a lot of credit for the audience ambiences because most of that was delivered without sound. The tiling was done. We were on the move to another location. They left the VFX people behind without a sound team to fill in the crowd. So when you hear the audience reactions, some of that was taken from the production tracks, but then Ron really had to build to it. And his sense of space. There's one Steadicam shot that starts in the back that goes all the way down the aisle, then up on the stage and spins around them, and you can hear the size of the space kind of shift as we get closer to them, which is really nice.
Well, and then the second half of that is just when it's Lenny and Midge on the stage by themselves, no microphone, gave us that time to actually feel the acoustics more and, you know, have some fun in an empty room,
Well,
which
we
was,
boomed a
you know,
bunch of that
it's
too.
always great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
boomed a
we
bunch of
used
that
it.
also to get more of a sense of space. I mean, everyone's like, we go into a church and they go, wow, isn't that echoey? And I'm like, I love the sound of a space. A
Yeah, it's great.
space informs the space you record and informs everything we do. And I have no problem with that.
Because again, my whole job is to make sure it's as clear as possible. We understand everything being said, but I don't want it to sound as if it's a complete lavalier recording from top to bottom. I have to give it its due, basically.
Life.
It's, you know,
yeah, it is such impressive work in those final sequences. Thanks for doing that deep dive. It's so interesting to hear. There's so many other aspects of the episode I want to ask you about. Matt, you had mentioned the raid of the Wolford earlier. There's that great monologue that Midge gives at the Wolford where it moves from a kind of raucous crowd to very silent, emotional moments as Midge is talking about Moishe. So many things, and we don't have time to grapple with them all, but I did want to ask about another moment that I find so striking about the episode, which is the final moments as Midge is leaving Carnegie Hall in the blizzard, the gusting winds, the weather, the kind of, it's very, it just evokes such a mood and an emotion to end the season. So I wanted to ask you both to kind of talk about putting that together. I don't know where you shot that and what the conditions were like when you shot it. So just talk us through creating that real historical snowstorm to kind of cap off the season.
Well, that was shot. The trudge through the snow, the scene in the newsstand, and all the rest. Well, no, the scene in the newsstand was before the hotel, right? And afterwards, that was shot on the back of Steiner Studios at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Our amazing art. This is where Maisel's money goes. Why it's all on screen. Because there's the front stages, and there's a big wide roadway where trucks usually go, and then there's back stages, and they built these facades of stores. Like there's a record store. There's I think there's a pharmacy, but these were set. That was art department work, and they brought in tons of snow, And this is August, I think.
It was August. It was
Oh,
summer.
no, they
Yeah.
brought in tons of snow. They had big fans. They had trucks that was grinding snow and blowing it. But fortunately, most of that there's no dialogue for her walk. And when she looks up at the Gordon Ford sign, that's not there. That was all visual effects. So I have to, we had a lot of fan, not a lot of dialogue. So I have to give Ron all the credit for the ending of that episode. I do.
Well, like you're saying, it's historical. It really happened. Lenny's concert was during a blizzard, and it actually shut down the subways. It shut down everything. So by the time Midge would have left Carnegie Hall, she wouldn't have been able to get a cab. She wouldn't have been able to do anything. She would have had to walk home. She would have had to like figure a way to get out of there. And it presented us with some sound effects to finally have a lot of fun with that we didn't have to compete with dialogue. I had to make a little room for a car by with people singing about Kennedy. But other than that, it was the music, which is, you'll recall, is very delicate. So we had to make sure that we still heard that delicate, score going on, or not score, but another needle drop. But we needed to hear that as well as get the sense that this storm is big and blows her umbrella around. She loses her hat. I mean, everything that could go wrong goes wrong for Midge at that moment. And I took one liberty near the end of that whole storm when she's looking up. You hear a very faint subway brake squeal going on at the very, very end that I just loved. And we had a big argument, not an argument, a discussion on the stage of whether or not that should stay or not, because theoretically all the subways were shut down. And I said, yeah, this is the last guy of the evening shutting down. He's just pulling in, and that's the end of the night for him.
That's
Um, because it just gave it, I don't know, a little extra button at the end that I wanted to have. And you know, Dan liked it and we put it in.
good. Good. What
I
was the
like it.
last song in that? What's the
What
last
was
needle?
what?
What's the last needle drop on that?
Cuckoo
That
by Benjamin Britten, I think.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Great piece. Before I let you both go, because we are almost out of time, I just wanted to ask you, reflecting on all of season 4, because there's some really terrific moments throughout. If each of you could identify one moment, not necessarily in just this episode, but that you're especially proud of or was memorable to work on. I mean, the season opens at Coney Island with the Wonder Wheel. We see Shai Baldwin's wedding. So many great moments this season. So just kind of any other moments you want to spotlight as favorites of yours.
Coney Island. Coney Island onto the Wonder Wheel and then off the Wonder Wheel. That whole section there was just like I had more fun working with the material that I was given by my brilliant crew, by Matt's tracks that again allowed me to backfill everything in those areas and still end up telling a story. We had that Wonder Wheel was shot on a set as well, and we had to give it space, we had to give it dimension. They had to go up to the top, and by the time they're up at the top, you're not hearing the Coney Island as much, but there's gulls, and everything just kind of moved and changed all the time. Dialogue is going 100% all the time, and that's always the challenge of Maisel of getting in. We build Maisel as if it's a feature, as if it's a feature that won't have dialogue in it, because Amy wants to hear everything that's going on in the scene and her dialogue. So, we build it in such a way that we can actually pull that off. And doing that whole Coney Island up to the Wonder Wheel was just so much fun.
I'm glad you brought up Coney Island. I mean, for me, the joy of working on the show is just working with the actors, watching Rachel perform, Tony Shalhoub. I mean, every single member of the cast. It's just to have them in my head, my ears. I always say, like, people around the set, they're not always like there, but I'm so dialed in because I'm listening to every word carefully. But the Coney Island stuff, not the Wonder Wheel so much for me, because that was a lot of green screen. They built a car. It was on the set. We hit a mic. We planted. We wired. It was kind of standard. But the walk around, the dialogue before the Wonder Wheel, that was challenged because all those rides were running at the time. Yeah, we didn't have music playing like they would have at Coney Island, and there was a huge amount of footwork. It's a long walk, and they're all talking. That's 8 or 9, 10 people talking, and so they all had to be wired. It's absolutely unboomable. And when I heard the tracks back and I could barely hear all the noise around them and they sounded so rich and full, I was very, very happy with those tracks. Out of all of them, those were pretty much, that was a tough scene. So I'm very gratified the way it came out.
Well, Ron and Matt, congratulations to you both. Congratulations to your colleagues as well who were nominated with you. Such a pleasure to speak with you both today. Thanks so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, David.